Welcome to the Consummate Athlete podcast, where we explore what it means to be a well-rounded, happy, goal-crushing athlete. Every week, myself, sports journalist Molly Herford, and cycling coach and kinesiologist Peter Glassford interview experts and chat through all of your training questions. We're excited to have you along for the ride. Hello. Welcome back to another episode of the Consummate Athlete podcast. Peter, how's it going?
Going well. That seems a very subdued intro, but I'm doing okay. We had a big weekend. It was a big bike packing weekend here in Ontario. I didn't really bike pack, more gravel road in full support.
I was going to say, I don't want to get a bunch of angry emails.
I already got some on Instagram, but most people were very supportive. Matt Katie, our friend, I'm trying to remember what is Rocket Fuel Foods, I think, on Instagram. He has some great books about making your own fuel as well for riding. He puts together a lot of the Ontario bikepacking routes, like the BT 700, which we spoke about a lot, and then this no winter maintenance route, which was I think 270K or something like that, and it goes around sort of where I grew up and where we live currently as well. So I did this, and you supported myself and my friend and coaching our coached athlete John Barnes did that, and we rode through and saw all sorts of people over the 2 days, and it was just a great couple days on bike. But it is so much riding, but I did okay. I always joke about my 90-minute rides, and I did okay. It wasn't miserable at all. It was quite good.
Quite miserable good. At all. There's your, that's your overarching review.
Well, just so impressive, like I was riding basically a road bike, super light. I had my pack and 2 bottles, but that was, really just was like the weight of a pack. But there's, someone did it on a fat bike with tons of gear, and I think they actually did 200K the one day, and we only did 160. So just really impressive what people can do, over the course of a day.
Yeah, it's funny. That's actually, so I was on the Trillium Running podcast last week talking about the Sulphur Springs trail race that we did. We hopped into the relay. We talked about that last week on the show. And I was on the Trillium Running podcast talking about that event. And I said kind of the same thing, like so impressive what people are capable of. And, when you think of cyclists or trail runners, you kind of often you envision a certain type of athlete, right? But we were saying both with the bike packing and this trail running thing, just all different people doing these amazing feats of endurance, and kind of no matter what speed you're doing it. To me, like the people who are doing it slower are actually so much tougher. Like I think we have it super easy, to be honest. Like we're both pretty capable of going quite quickly for a lot of this stuff. And to me, that's so much easier. It is so much easier to run, 50 miles in 8 hours than it is to do 50 miles in 16 hours. And same with you, it was so much easier to bike pack the 150K in, 7 hours or whatever it was. And I use bike pack in air quotes here. Than it was for, the fat
Certainly.
bike loaded down with gear.
Yeah, and I mean, there's lots of factors there, right? Like there's the genetics of, I have a high VO2 max, and I've also had the, privilege of being able to train for a lot of years and have good equipment. And it's just sort of, but everyone can do it. And that's, I think, the amazing thing. I know when I spoke to Brooke Smith about the Tour Divide, we were speaking about how, the pro guys come in and then they're just amazed because they're pinned trying to get through these big bike packing things. And then, they have the realization that there's, quote unquote, normal people who, really they're not that much further behind in the grand scheme of things, right? It might be the course of days and something like the Tour Divide, but as a percentage, it's not as much as you would expect, right? When someone's like the Tour de France, best equipment. So really, really cool. Anyhow, it was great, and lots of good chats with people, some repairs on the side of the road. I always love stopping and helping people, so that was really fun. Just really, really great. So again, kudos to our friend Matt Katie. And if you can get up to Ontario and do any of these bikepacking routes or even parts of them as part of a gravel ride, again, a lot of, people were doing it just as a gravel training weekend, like that's what we were doing. Come on up and definitely enjoy the best gravel in the world, if I do say so myself. Yeah.
Yes, and we might have some plans in the works for next year, for sure.
Well, we'll see.
Yeah. Well, I think this is actually a really good precursor to our topic today, which is marginal gains for masters athletes, because I think what we're trying to kind of get at here is, for a lot of people, the enjoyment of being out on the ride run or whatever, doing these events or these adventures it's not about the marginal gains. You know, a lot of these people weren't carrying the super secret supplement or the,
Right.
you know, this,
Or
that, or the
trying
other
to make
thing.
it the absolute lightest they could. I mean, indeed, someone was riding a fat bike for, okay, they're actually trying to, I guess, reverse marginal gains this or
Yeah,
something.
yeah.
I don't know. Or maybe the tires are just really great in some places. I don't know.
Yeah, so I thought that was just kind of an interesting way to start this is you don't necessarily need marginal gains to, especially not to enjoy the adventures. Now, that said, like obviously we are very interested in improving performance kind of however we can within legal boundaries. Let's be clear here.
And do you want, I'll try and find we do have a question down here. Do you want to read that? If I can find it.
If you can find it.
It's way down.
Okay, here we go. So at 67 years old, I'm looking for all the little things that might help make up some of the difference between my athletic performance on a bike from when I was 35, 45, even 50. I'm not talking about the obvious things like having a lower body fat, strength, core training, good training plan. Thanks for that. But more of a quote unquote marginal gain type of things like Aero socks, power breathing exercises, the sports gel, the wax chain. Like to hear your opinion on the small things, if there are any that add up, and what marginal gains you feel are worthwhile, especially for the aging athlete. I mean, so love this question, first of all.
It's good, and I mean, now having read this is like the third or fourth time I've read this. It actually is, you know, an interesting when you get into like things like the wax chains and different technological advances, and also looking past, you know, just strictly like trying to lose weight or something like that. And it acknowledges that something like strength training might, you know, be obvious.
I love that, yeah.
I just did an article for Canadian Cycling Magazine, and I'm trying to remember what it was about.
Tips for marginal gains for masters athletes.
It's like getting your snap back is the working title. So it's sort of in line with this really in a lot of ways, where it's like you're getting older, you used to be a little more, you know, have a little more punch and race, you know, and get up and go. And then now, you know, how do you get your snap back?
Right.
And so I kept trying to make Austin Powers jokes with getting your mojo back, but I don't know if that's going to make the cut.
I hope it does. I mean, I feel like that's your target audience will understand that joke.
But you know, I had to almost start off the article, and I don't know if that'll make the cut either. But with that, like, well, there's the sort of we overuse the phrase big rocks, just like, you know, the obvious things that's listed here is, you know, before you have snap, you have to train. So a lot of times people will, I've seen this where it's like, this didn't work, you know, the training didn't work, and it's like, but I didn't train for the last 2 weeks. Okay. So, I mean, I guess, yeah, like, you know, it didn't work. So I guess leading into this, then we're going to make the assumption that you are training somewhat consistently, you know, you're following some good practices. We'll touch a bit on good practices. But those would be, you know, big rocks so the opposite of marginal gains would be what?
Major gains? I don't know.
Right. So you've already got your 98% benefit. Now you want to squeak out the last 1%. So I think where we'll start with this is, you know, a lot of us masters, myself included, there's still a lot of the basics that would, you know, give you more benefit for, you know, when you go and spend an hour riding your bike, you get a lot of benefit, right? And much more than rubbing some expensive gel on your legs, you know, you're ever going to get out of something like that, right? Just the percentages of benefit can't be great. And in fact, sometimes it's neutral. You just spent a bunch of money and got no benefit. And in some cases, in the case of something like, say, beetroot juice, which could be beneficial, but also expensive, you could also have a negative situation with that, right? Where
I thought you were going to say explosive instead of expensive.
well, that would be a good joke, I guess. But that's indeed a lot of the stuff that quote unquote works, especially in nutritional supplements.
It's going to make you poop.
It makes you poop, right? So we have coffee, we have beetroot juice, baking soda, something like that, which is sodium phosphate, so stuff like that. A lot of it works, but
Sodium bicarbonate?
Bicarbonate, sorry.
Oh.
This problem is there's like a risk with a lot of these things, right? And then again, the benefit is not really that much. You know, again, the anything with beetroot juice or things like that, like the margin to gain is not large.
And those are even the kind of inexpensive ones, like all things considered. Then you get into the pricier ones, you know, you're talking about creatine or whey protein or collagen or any of these things.
Well, right now on the sodium bicarbonate. Yeah, I think there's both. But anyhow, I think I might be confusing two things. But anyhow, baking soda is hard to digest. So now Martin they have the like more digestible one they've been trying to get
for
in.
$1 billion.
Yeah, and so it's like 4 doses for I think $100 or something.
Holy.
Yeah. So it's like a big. You would use it before your big race, I guess, right? Or in the tour they would be sponsored and maybe they'd use it or whatever. But it's still not even clear that that's that much better. There's been neat studies where they've actually like tried to pull out the placebo benefit of it and also the opposite of that, the nocebo, as I like to call it, and where they're actually telling people they're going to poop, and there's like been all sorts of interesting things there too, where so they're actually saying like if you're telling someone that this is going to digest better, then it actually ends up digesting better as well. So
interesting.
So all that to say, that's very expensive, and again, still you're just trying to get this like extra bit of a percent, which in a Tour de France stage that ends in a sprint, where the margins are small, then that could be beneficial.
For sure.
But then for the rest of us, I don't know.
Okay, but here's the thing. I was just going to say, for the rest of us, part of this question, another person wrote in actually kind of in relation to the episode we did a few weeks ago about what I've been doing for Leadville and talking about, our altitude tent and how I've changed my training and stuff. I think it is actually okay for a master's, and I'm putting myself in that category. Like, I am no longer really chasing the pro athlete dream, we'll say.
Yeah, just trying to go to Leadville maybe win.
Maybe win. Okay. We'll see. But anyway, like I'm going as all in as I can on it, which includes some of these marginal gain stuff, right? Like I have the Normatec boots, we have the altitude tent, so and we have a lot of these things. I am playing around with creatine and that kind of stuff. Although, P.S., it's very expensive because we are going for the informed sport and NSF certified for sport stuff, which very important part of the marginal gains. If it seems sketchy, it probably is. Don't do it. Look for the labels. Anyway, I digress. All that to say, I think it's totally reasonable to want to go after these marginal gains if you have the funds, if you have the time, if you want to, like, by all means go for it. Like, your race matters just as much as a Tour de France racer going for the sprint.
Okay, so that's probably in line with I had notes for you before this, so that was sort of the whatever you want to do, you can do, and we're not picking on you. If we say, if it sounds like we're not into whatever you're doing, whatever gels you're rubbing on your legs or whatever boots you're putting on your boot or your legs, you can do whatever you want. And I think I always try and say, like, these extra things, probably whatever you believe in, this gets back to that placebo, you just really believe in it and do it. So if you believe in Normatec boots or creatine, just make sure you do it and really believe in it. And don't let anyone tell you different. And that's probably great. That's probably going to get you the 1%. Where I get concerned is when we're doing too many of these things because it gets expensive and a little convoluted. And there's this idea of the additive effect. I've mentioned this before. This is something I think I learned from Trent Stellenwerf on a podcast he was on. A great Canadian physiologist, has done a lot with track runners and a lot of different really neat research all over the place, nutritional and otherwise. But he talks about how when you have all these products that are supposed to be, 1%, beetroot makes you 1%, this makes you 1%, this makes you 1%, this makes you 1%. It doesn't ever total up to like 100.
You're not going to get 40% better if you're doing 40 things.
Right. So it doesn't, right? And that's all, they'll see this across, you try and combine supplements. So caffeine and creatine and what else again, beetroot juice or something like this. If you could digest all that stuff,
I was going to say, you're
not poop, it doesn't add up. And so there's like, well, what is going on there? And so it's sort of like the body can only take on these things. There's all these like overlapping physiological processes, and you sort of get like this, what's the word I'm looking, like a saturation of those effects. And so just recently we were speaking about that when Stephen Chung was on talking about heat adaptation, and he was saying the dilemma though is that when you do the heat adaptation sessions, you're in a sauna, your body actually doesn't do a lot of the endurance adaptation. So you can't you can't just have everything all at once, right? So even though heat adaptation makes you 3% better, and these intervals might be, you can't just overlap all those together at the same time and get 20% better, because the body's it can only adapt to so much. It can only like add on, and I don't know what the analogy would be. I'm almost thinking like a car with like the NOS button, right? You can't have like two NOS buttons or else like the engine blows.
Right.
And so you may blow, I guess. Yeah. So the additive effect is like a key thing that I always think about when I'm like, oh, I want to add in another kooky thing into the repertoire here.
Yeah. Well, and this is, Stephen actually talks a bit about this when you're talking about like the cold plunge stuff, or, if you look at some some of the research where it's talking about the heavy antioxidant dosages after exercise, like cold or like a high dose antioxidant after exercise is going to like, yes, it's going to cut inflammation, but guess what? Now you're not getting as many of the benefits of exercise. So really, most of these marginal gain things are going to come with some kind of trade-off, barring the like Team Sky bringing their fancy mattresses that they sleep really well on to different hotels.
Sure.
I can't really see a downside to that.
Well, and yeah, and I mean the Team Sky marginal gains things, like we're just ignoring the like doping implications with all of that for right now, and right, like we're just sort of thinking like Normatec boots, we're thinking, you know, this little supplement or this little rub or this pre-race whatever.
Again, all assuming that it's NSF certified for sport and third-party tested, et cetera, et cetera.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I'm looking like the whole range of things here. Like I think we've been playing with a few clients. We've had like some short jumping interventions that we talked about when Greg Lehman was on that take sort of 5 to 15 minutes. Again, there's a risk there, but the time, 5 to 15 minutes, up to 5 times a week, you know, but a lot of times it's more like 3. You know, that's a time. You're not riding your bike, you're not sleeping, but do we think that there's going to be like a 1 or 2 or 5% benefit there, or a little less risk of injury, while also acknowledging there's a huge risk of injury with jumping? You know, so we pick these things that we think might help. You know, if someone's a slower athlete like myself, you know, not great at just like punching out of the hole, then you know, does that make sense when I say that? Is that weird?
No, I have no idea what you mean.
So like you're slowed down on your mountain bike and you have to like get going again. You know, it's that like initial. So it's almost like when you jump or when you do a squat, right? It's that like.
If you don't have a lot of explosive power.
Yeah, I'm like a, you know, more of a endurance athlete, I guess, who wants to be a, you know, mountain bike racer, a short just duration. So this would be where maybe you would try, you know, because now we're starting to think, well, who is the person, right? Maybe you don't need, like I have clients that can win, you know, the start, you know, get the whole shot off of every line. They're super fast twitch people. Do they really need to play with creatine? I don't know, right? Like, but then maybe they need to go do endurance training or do something, you know, maybe there's a supplement that helps more an endurance adaptation for them, right, to try, and if that is a limiter in their event. So sometimes trying to think about the individual as well, and I think that is when you're picking what you're believing in, you know, that would be the idea, is like you're trying to almost, even independent of that, you're almost trying to say like, well, I'm not a great sprinter, but I take creatine, so I'm going to be a benter. Now I can be a great sprinter, and I'm going to believe that as much as I can, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah, for sure.
So
well, and something like the compression boots might be helpful for someone who really struggles with, you know, getting in recovery and staying calm and relaxed.
I've, you know, growing up, I'm thinking of athletes I was on the same teams as, you know, friends and stuff, and they would talk about always being poofy, and, you know, I get poofy, and then like that would be on, and it's like, well, maybe the compression boots would be great, and it like helps de-poof, and you can believe that is helping with the, you know, the being poofy or something. I don't know.
It definitely does. Side
right?
note.
So we'll get into that. I do want to talk about sort of this, like the passive stuff, like the compression boots, but what do you have something, you know, we had these hierarchy of needs at the top of our notes here. Are you okay if we go into that?
Yeah, I think that's probably a good spot to jump.
So there's 2. One's a callback to a past episode with Steven Seiler, a very early one, actually. I think the first time we had Steven on, he had done a presentation on the endurance needs, so the Seiler's hierarchy of endurance needs, which is sort of drawn off of the Maslow hierarchy of needs. So anyone who's taken like Psych 101 probably has seen Maslow's hierarchy of needs. It's sort of a pyramid, and it's this idea of, at our very base, we need what Maslow calls physiological needs, and these are things like air, water, food, shelter. You know, these are the things we might call like big rocks, right? Which are probably obvious to a lot of us, but this is where sometimes I have to remind clients, you know, probably, you know, if you keep your family happy, it would be better for training, because
I think now you're actually skipping ahead a couple a couple of rocks there. You've jumped to love and belonging already.
Okay, well,
physiological, we're talking sleep. We're talking
okay, so but if you don't sleep, right, this is obvious, you need to sleep, and sometimes for you know, a type A athlete, that's not a doing. You know, that's not a go out and train for another 2 hours extra. That's like, oh, I just go to bed every day at 10 and wake up at 6, and that's, you know, 8 hours, that type of thing, right? You know, that sounds too simple, right? We always joke about Matt Fitzgerald, who we'll talk about in a second, and he always seems to be on the like, yeah, you could just drink chocolate milk and it'd be okay, and, you know, just recover, and everyone's like, this isn't kooky enough.
It's true. Yeah. That, and I mean, oh gosh, that was like a decade ago at this point.
I don't even know if he likes chocolate milk anymore.
I don't know. He's been on the podcast a couple times. We should link to his episodes in the show notes because he's one of my favorite all-time guests, authors, etc.
Right.
Anyway.
Hierarchy. So going up. So again, obvious, like you need air, you need to sleep at some point. So,
but a lot of people, a lot of masters that we're talking about in this like marginal gains thing don't actually see sleep as one of the major things, right? There's so many people now that are like, oh yeah, I'm great on 4 hours of sleep. I'm totally fine on, 4 to 6 hours of sleep.
And giving up sleep for kooky stuff, or less kooky, like you're trying to fit in the hour of training at 11 p.m. and then you'll go to bed at 12, but maybe you're wound up and you're not going to sleep very well, but you're up at 5 for work. So we do see this stuff, right? And there is a trade-off, a balance there. I get it, but that's the physiological. The other thing should mention too here is the food is part of that big topic. But there are some foundational, just big things, right? Like, are we fueling appropriate? Next week's episode is around nutrition with an RD, and it's Red S and sort of this energy availability, which is a great big topic. But again, base of the pyramid, and where we could spend a bunch of money with an RD on good food, on whatever support on our nutrition, right? And just not kooky stuff, just enough. And some vegetables, some protein, not doing kooky things and derailing ourselves, by 100% potentially, right? If you just can't train anymore because of going down the wrong, pathway, the wrong diet.
Well, and I think what's interesting about this is, I mean, you've seen this hugely in the past, I'm going to say year, where you started actually fueling more, having more simple carbohydrates primarily. Both in training, but also even just throughout the day. Like you've been, having toast more, and we've been having more rice with meals and stuff. And shocker, you feel better. I've heard you actually say, if 15 years ago,
oh for sure,
you had been told about this and had clued in on eating more of that stuff, and maybe turning a little less orange from sweet potato consumption. Things could have been different.
Fair enough. Yeah, and I mean, it was a different time. I beat myself up about it, but then also it's like it was just a time where there were these stories about the pros, having carbonated water so that they couldn't, they would not be hungry going to sleep, and all this sort of certainly a doping era, right? And then that trickled down and whatever. So it is
not the doping part, to be clear.
It's sort of that fueling the work required, right? And so not all of us are training huge hours, but I always say if you want to train more and you're having problems recovering to train more, then that is the solution there. And again, we may need support from a nutritionist or a therapist, a psychologist, any of those umbrella of great people. So again, tricky, but that's the base, right? And that base is complicated and big and can go in a lot of different ways. After there, so again, we're working on this Maslow hierarchy of need. We'll try and expedite through this or accelerate. So we have safety needs. And these are things like personal security, employment, resources, health, property.
Well, I think it's versus shelter. Property means you're actually you feel comfortable where you are and not you're about to get booted out of it any second, which makes perfect sense as far as, I mean,
a stability in your life.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and the idea is that we're building towards this peak of it's called self-actualization, right? And we don't all get to this peak of this Maslow hierarchy, but that's the idea, is that we're building, and so you need these foundational components to get up to these other levels, and to be if obviously if you're struggling for air, there's not a lot else that matters in life. So hopefully that makes sense, that there's sort of these really important things on the base.
Well, I think from a training perspective, this one is actually important, Maslow's, not the training version of it, because if you are struggling with work stuff, or you are pretty strapped financially, again, there's no marginal gain that you can buy that is going to kind of offset the stress of that stuff.
And it might be, things that help you get through and cope and get through a busy period in life. And again, it's not a criticism of anyone, but when we're thinking about long-term solutions, these are the things, right? And again, there is going to be disruption. It's not that everything's going to be kumbaya your entire life, right? But sometimes this is where we have to circle around. There is a relationship problem that needs to be dealt with, right? And it's, there isn't, a special compression boot that's going to help that. And indeed, using some of those things sometimes can be a distraction away from those other things, taking a walk and talking it out.
Yeah, it's funny. As we were at this bike packing weekend, we were talking to someone who was saying they'd gotten permission from their spouse to do a certain stage race, but then when the spouse like realized what the training plan actually entailed, suddenly it was no longer really that acceptable that they were doing it.
Right. Yeah, and this is like, can you prepare for the goal that you've set type idea that we speak about often. So there you go. So let's finish off this pyramid. We have love and belonging, which I think is fairly straightforward above that. And then esteem, so this is like respect, self.
Oh my God, sorry, love and belonging, super straightforward,
Yeah,
no
there you go.
issues
well,
there,
we were just
no
talking
problems.
about, relationship stuff and whatever. And then esteem is above that. This is like freedom and recognition and all these things that you're building on top of this. So this might be coming from work. This might also be coming from sport as well. And then self-actualization, which is the desire to become the most that one can be.
I got nothing.
Which is sort of this idea, right? This is where we start adding those little marginal gains. And this is just the peak of that pyramid where maybe there is something, right? Like maybe there is like whatever, altitude, like, and if we go down here, so we'll link to Maslow's thing as well. You can certainly Google that. And then there's Seiler sort of played on this, and he made another pyramid. And in my mind, a lot of what we just had is almost like this pyramid almost sits on top of, that other pyramid. So you still need the air and whatnot at the bottom. And I almost wish that there was this like almost like that acknowledgement in the bottom of Seiler's where it was just like, you take care of from air, shelter, family, relationships, work. And then once we get that, then he's having us build in frequency and volume of training as the base of his endurance training needs, right? So this is again where if you're not training regularly, that's really the best thing you can do. So for a lot of people, this is, your, standard American or North American diet, and we could expand diet to mean movement diet, right? So it's a lot of us probably could go for a walk, time in nature, go for a walk. Maybe that's a bike ride some days, but bikes are sometimes hard to integrate into movement, but that's a lot of the things. So for a lot of the general population, a lot of us, even if I look at myself, probably the answer is to go for a walk most of the time.
It's true.
Get in bed on time, go for a walk. I train fairly regularly, but the steps and the time out in nature, not at a computer desk, just sitting stationary is limited. So I think with Seiler's stuff, this frequency and volume of movement is what I would put at the bottom. He calls that training. And the frequency of the number of the days active, right? So again, this is maybe you're listening to this and you're like, I do train 8 hours a week, but how many days are off or very minimal movement, total movement, right? And this is that, again, steps in the day could be measured that way, or activity trackers. Katie Bowman we've had on talking about that. You have this one nutrient, which is your cycling nutrient, movement nutrient, and she talks about movement diets. And then, but are you walking? Are, the shapes that you're in the day? Are your arms going over your head? Is your leg going behind you as you would in walking? Or is it just sitting at a desk and then sitting on a bike? So that's, I think, a big important one. And there's really that base. We'll link to Seiler's pyramid again, but above that is that high intensity. So this is where we get into intervals. So a little bit of intervals, you could stack that. Once you're training frequently, this should sound really familiar because we talk about this all the time. Mm-hmm. First frequency, then volume, and then intensity when you're thinking about what matters. So then, we get to the high intensity training. And then the next one, which is, very much Steven Seiler, is this like training intensity distribution. So that's sort of how much you're doing of each of those, the mix of and that's like your 80-20, your 90-10, where it's mostly easy, a little bit hard across the week.
It really just gets into the, are you following a plan?
That's right. Yeah, not being, going to full sweet spot, moderate training all the time, trying to burn as many calories as you can in that hour you have to train every day. So those are really the three bases, right? And then once you get above this, you can go deep on this if you want to. I don't think we will, but they sort of get into the planning, the periodization of the training, and then you get up towards the top, and it's like more of the altitude training camps. Can you read that top one? I can't even read what's at the peak, but
you're racing, you're tapering, all of that kind of stuff.
Yeah, stuff that it's not really, tapering and peaking isn't even really like that clear. Like that again would be like 1% type things. But your nutritional supplements, your altitude camps, your any of that stuff is what you add just at the the extra little bit you have, right? The benefit's so small versus these other elements. So again, I think that's a good resource when we're thinking about these other things is, are there actually things we could spend a bit of time on, and that are even free a lot of the times,
right?
Versus any of these other interventions.
Yeah. And our person who wrote in with the question asked, a great question, and kind of said, like, after you're doing all the big rocks. But I do think it is important for all of us to continually revisit whether or not we are actually doing the big rocks. Because, I mean, like we've said, like, we certainly know what the big rocks are. Like, we are very well aware of them. We don't always nail them. There's always way more we could be doing to do better with them, for sure. A week ago, I had a red-eye flight home from LA. Like, I did not sleep that night. I didn't necessarily make it up or really do that much to kind of come back from that. Just went right back into real life. We were on the road this weekend because Peter was doing this, gravel training camp thing. So our nutrition was not amazing.
And I think that's the lesson of life, is that balance isn't like perfect every day, right? But over the course of the week, hopefully things balance out, and you have your salad once you get home. Like last night we had salad and it was, some veggies, and it was just great to have, some actual nutrients after existing on, sugar powder and bars mostly for a lot of the weekend.
For sure. But just say, like, you might think that you have the big rocks nailed, but it's always good to kind of come back and revisit them anytime you are thinking towards the, like, what marginal gain thing should I, like, buy or try next? Like, okay, is there anything I can be doing that's free?
And what again, I guess maybe I'm 40 and I get, like, sappy, right? But it is, this, there's probably relationships, whether that's spousal, is spousal the right word? Your actual, your relationship that way, or friends, family that you could be reaching out to. And again, it's a two-way street. Like, it is therapeutic to talk to friends and, maybe go for a walk in nature with friends. This is all very rejuvenating, right? And it is tricky when you start hearing about some of these other things that are pulling you away from people and away from nature and away from movement even. It's sometimes where I get a little just concerned that there isn't, other things we could be doing.
It's true. Yeah. Like, I would never trade our afternoon walk with DW for sitting at home by myself in the compression boots while you went out and walked DW.
Right. Yeah. Or like some weird nutritional thing you gotta, like, sit and prepare, or I don't know.
Well, and do versus going to a restaurant with friends on a Thursday because you got invited. You haven't been out in a while.
Yeah, that's the idea. And so, I mean, something like our walk, we try and block that in the calendar. It doesn't fit every day of every week, but, we try and take that walk, and it's together in nature and with the dog. And, it's just something that, again, that you can, like, prioritize that too, right? But again, I could train for another hour.
For sure.
Or whatever. So,
well, I had that conversation with a friend the other day. We were talking about doing doubles and running and stuff. And I said, I really should be doing doubles more often than I do, but that would mean I don't get to walk with you guys during the day, because that would be my time that I have to do that. And I'm not willing to sacrifice walking for running in that case.
Sure. We mentioned Fitzgerald. So maybe on that line, he had a great, this is an article that was on Strava, actually, which I didn't realize that was a place that we could go for articles. Did you know that?
I did know that. They actually have a lot of good stuff.
Yeah, okay. Well, this was a great article by Matt Fitzgerald. He's a great writer. And so this is sort of this it's referencing marginal gains and I think aggregation of gains as well. So we'll link to this Matt Fitzgerald Strava article. But the idea is, here, let me read this quote. This was a quote of Olav Boo, who is a Norwegian triathlon coach. Probably did not say that right, but I will read this quote. Then the seconds...
Oh, wait, you forgot the beginning of it.
Oh. Okay, here we go. Do you want me to read it, or do you want to read it?
Do you want me to read it?
Oh, go ahead.
Start with the things that make up the minutes, then the seconds, then the tenths of a second.
Oh.
That's the quote.
Oh. Okay, I was going to read this whole thing. This was a chunk from the article. So then Matt Fitzgerald goes on to say, all too often, though, athletes adopt sophisticated elite practices before they've addressed the basic flaws in their training or diet.
For example, an athlete might start practicing double threshold sessions, i.e. completing 2 lactate threshold workouts in one day, having learned that Olympic and world champion Jacob Ingebrigtsen, totally messed that one up, does so. But at best, this method will save a few seconds on race day, where he's correcting the almost universal error of going too fast on quote-unquote easy days would yield minutes, if not tens of minutes.
Sure. So that is sort of intensity distribution, and I guess, the intensity out of Steven Seiler's pyramid as well. So I think this is sort of the main idea.
Yeah, this is it. This isn't sexy. Going easy on easy days is pretty freaking boring. There's nothing cool or spicy to add to your Strava. Apologies to Strava when you do that. But that's what's going to make you a better athlete in the long run. So, I mean, all of this to say, though, how does this apply to our question asker who, theoretically is already doing the things? What can he do? What should he do?
Well, I mean, I think trying to do that consistently is very difficult. So just, making sure that you are training frequently and training often easy, but then also hard. What I see with a lot of masters, this was in this article I was mentioning I was writing earlier for Canadian Cycling Magazine with the snap, is a lot of times if you want snap, you do need to train in a snappy way, where it is hard, you're breathing, hard. Sometimes it's sprint training, which is stuff that as masters we stop doing. And I get why, it's not really that fun. It does take focus. It's, maybe not as social sometimes. But if that is the goal, then you do need to do that, right? And that's supported by the Stacy Sims Roar stuff, in high intensity strength training, plyometrics. It's supported by the Joe Friel Fast After 50, where the VO2 max type training was really, really a big part of it, and strength training as well. So, I mean, the support's all there, but it gets very difficult. You get tired as you get on, and you've been doing it for a while. So, yeah, that's the tricky thing, is I think that is a lot of what we need to do. Now, is there space? What I think, again, we talked about that idea that you sort of pick the thing that you want to do, or maybe the thing that does help with some of your limiters or things that you struggle with. So if you are someone who's maybe injury prone, and you find that a massage gun, or you find that an
actual massage,
or some combination thereof is great, or there is a supplement that could be great, right? And we just want to make sure that there's a mechanism for this thing to be effective, because I think sometimes this something like the compression is well supported. We all know you get hurt and then you compress the thing, and that makes sense, right? What else is supported? We'll link to a couple of the things around supplements, but we mentioned, some of the creatine and caffeine. Those things are well supported. So again, you could pick one or two of these and then believe in them and use them appropriately at the right timing, at the right dosage, because there's a mechanistic and sort of an understanding that these things should help your sport. And that's where we need to be careful, because some things don't help, they're more for sprinting, or they're more for endurance, or whatever they're for. So I think that's where these things would fit in.
Cool. Now you have a note here about aggregation of marginal gains and the compounding.
So that's a James Clear thing. And so that actually sort of goes against the other one we were talking about.
Right, where you can't get 40% better just because you do 41% things.
But the slight twist is that he's saying, you do a little better every day, and then in a bunch of years, you're going to be it's sort of like your savings, right? You save $1 a day, and then you're a millionaire in however long that takes.
Now, I have some issues with this whole concept, to be completely honest,
okay.
But...
Go ahead.
I think it's... The whole getting 1% better every day, I think is very problematic in a lot of ways, because I think it forces that weird one more. It's one more mile, one more rep, one more this, one more... to the point where you're no longer actually following the plan, because you've now been told to do 1% or 10% more, with the expectation that it's going to make you better. But a lot of the times it's actually doing the thing you're supposed to do, not going the literal extra mile. So there is a bit of please stick to the plan as we're talking about this. Do not take this to mean you need to crank up the volume by one. When you hear this.
It is tricky. Yeah. So I don't know what you do. Maybe that's an appealing thing, right? And that might be your motivation. For you do your yoga every morning, and maybe that is something that, I don't know, does it aggregate? I don't know if that gets exponentially better over time, but
no,
probably
it is just as hard every time. Now I've added every 6 months, maybe I add a push-up to the routine. So now it's 37 push-ups.
Okay.
Like within the practice every morning.
Which isn't really exponential,
but it did start with like 15, I think.
And you're making that normal a little bit harder, which is great. So I don't know. I think that's a good way to think about some of these things, is that it's like going to have a benefit. You know, you don't get injured, knock on wood, that often. Yeah. So this could be something where those 10 minutes do, you know, it is a big deal, because if that's the thing, you know, aside from just good training theory, again, the big concept, you don't go and try and run too much or too fast. You know, maybe that yoga is, you know, a great addition, you know, in these small little, you know, you could call that marginal. 10 minutes out of the day is not very much, you know, versus some people would do an hour. You have to do an hour of yoga.
Right.
So maybe that's the lesson to take out of that. And maybe what you don't see is that the actual benefit, oh, we have a thumbs up on the screen. The actual benefit is huge because you don't get injured.
Yeah.
And those are the hard things to track, right? Is because you know when you do get injured, but you don't know when you didn't get injured, or you missed an injury, or you really mitigated how bad an injury was.
Well, and then I think there's also the other kind of downside of the like going after marginal gains is, because the last time I did have an injury, like I had a very minor knee thing, and I admit I completely panicked, and I probably could have just taken a week off and it would have been fine. But instead, I was like, oh, I need to go see, you know, these 3 people and get this done and this done and this done. And it did get better, like, don't get me wrong. But I think probably if I had done less versus doing more, it would have had the same effect.
It's the tricky thing with recovery from injury, because time goes by. So we don't know, you know, if you could take 2 examples of yourself where the one just, you know, does the best to go through your day, and, you know, you certainly back off of running or stop running. And then the other version is going to acupuncture and physio or whatever you're doing. You don't know that the physio was required to get to that same point. So it's tricky to study. You know, some studies don't actually have that control very well. It might be physio versus stretching, but it isn't always, you know, it's hard to control to say, like, this person just didn't do anything. They just didn't, you know, get stressed about it. They didn't run for a week, and then they started back with a run walk, and they were back running in 6 weeks. And then the physio person also was back running in 6 weeks. It's hard to say, you know, and it's hard to hear as someone who, you know, might be doing therapy, you know, or our listeners who are physiotherapists or something as well, right? But that's the tricky thing, is we don't know when time goes by, if it was just strictly time and the body naturally healing itself.
Yeah, so we do make that joke that my thing with a lot of like work projects or projects that I've consulted on and stuff has been, what if we didn't? Like, what if we just didn't do anything or didn't change the thing? Because I think that's an important question to ask when you are trying to make like a change, whether it's like a branding thing or like a company name or XYZ thing in PR stuff. Like, well, what if we just didn't do anything?
Right.
And a lot of the time, that actually is as effective as doing a huge campaign, except it's cheaper because you don't have to do anything. And I do think that's a good question to ask when you are kind of approaching any of these marginal gains or otherwise.
Well, and so there's lots of products out there. There's, you know, things you can wear. You can wear glasses, and there's things with sounds, and there's all sorts of different things. So I'm not going to pick on any one. If you use any of them, you keep using them. I'm sure they're great and enjoyable to use if you're still using them. But some of these things actually are related to that idea of time. And so you talked about an injury, but what we don't know is, say you use let's use your, I call them moon boots, but what are they called? The compression boots, the Normatecs and the different ones like that. So you do that, and then I lay on the couch, and we both lay for 40 minutes, and we're in a study. And then the question is, you know, afterwards, how do you feel? And, you know, then the next day we repeat a test maybe that we did before. We both go and do a 20-minute time trial or whatever it is. And, you know, to start this off, we did a 20-minute time trial, then we lay in our moon boots, and then the next day we go and repeat that 20-minute time trial.
Right, one of us lays in our moon boots.
You do, and then I just lay on the couch. Now the question is, we're both laying there, and you have these boots like compressing your legs. Is there any benefit, right? And I'm sure there's studies out there sort of trying to look at that, but it's hard to find ones that aren't done by the company. And then it's also hard, you know, what are you tracking, and is that performance better, right? And is even the feeling afterwards, is it any different? If I laid down for 40 minutes, I'd probably feel great, ready to go. I'm getting a little bored, you know, had a little nap. and then you wake up and you feel good. So the tricky thing is it required? And now sometimes you get a placebo on top of that, where I am jealous because you have these fancy $1,000 moon boots
I'd
on.
like to point out that you also wear the moon boots, so
They're great. And what I like is that it also keeps you from getting up. So in our study, maybe I get up early because I'm like, I can just get up. There's someone at the door. You know, the dog needs help. I'm going to go get up. And you're like, I can't get up. I'm in these moon boots. I'm zippered
it's great.
in. So it's hard to unravel. Hopefully that's, you know, what I'm trying to say is some of this stuff, it's hard to unravel if they're actually, the thing is doing the benefit. The other example I'd give is, you know, there's all these things that, you know, meditation or whatever. Now, if you just went and walked in nature without your phone, you just walk out, you know, whatever nature means, local park, you know, whatever. Do you feel more rejuvenated? What would be the effect on something like brain waves or heart rate or HRV? There's lots of studies on nature bathing. A lot of Scandinavian companies.
Forest bathing.
Forest bathing. What did I call it? Nature bathing? Forest bathing. Where you see these marked blood pressure decreases. There's all of these benefits of just walking in nature without any major intervention or kooky breathing or anything like that. So it's all probably good, but they're all, you know, what if we didn't? What if we did less? What would be a simpler, cheaper option? But then it's tough to unravel the placebo and the comparison trap where, like, again, I'm looking at you and you have these fancy boots and I'm just sitting laying on the couch with
like a chump.
You know, I could put my feet up on the wall and now we have gravity, you know, clearing the waste products or whatever we want to call it. So it's tricky to unravel. And that's where again, when we start adding more things to it, I don't know. Like, is there an additive effect there where we don't expect to get more benefit? You know, if I rub a bunch of lactate gel on my legs and then put on my compression socks and then put on an electric stimulator on my legs and then also compression, I don't know, like, you're not going to feel 1,000 times better the next day, right? So I think that makes logical sense.
No, I think you're going to get like electrocuted with that somehow.
Yeah, I don't know. So find the thing you like and use it. You know, try and make it match, you know, what is a limitation that you have. If you are someone who can't stay laying down, maybe the you know, compression boots make sense. If you are someone who's poofy, maybe the compression makes sense.
If you're someone who really struggles with nutrition, then perhaps our sponsor AG1 would make sense. Boom, snuck it in there. On the note of marginal gains, we do actually genuinely have to kind of shout out.
Well, we debated, do we include this sponsor? Because it seems like it's counter to this in some ways. That, you know, Peter's sitting here saying don't take supplements and don't, you know, buy gadgets.
Yes, but the fact is, we have been using AG1 for going on 3 years now, and it is something that we use every day, and it is something we believe in.
And limits, you know, the number of things that we're buying, the supplement products we're buying. So again, reduces the cost, I think, at the end of it, and then also reduces, you know, the interference that you could get from mixing and matching different products. It is NSF certified, so we are sort of eliminating the downside, hopefully, of taking bad supplements or contaminated supplements.
I can get a kit with all of the, you know, major vitamins, minerals, adaptogens, probiotics, prebiotics, greens, all the fun stuff in one-stop shop. But don't take our word for it. Try it yourself. All seriousness, you can head over to drinkag1.com/MollyH and you will get 5 free travel packs and a year of immune-supporting vitamin D on top of your subscription that will come straight to your door. And again, I realize that it's very silly to be talking about this in a Marginal Gains episode, but I actually thought it was worth it because it is one of the things that we actually do. Same with, we keep using the compression boots as an example because it's something that I've been using for, actually, same thing, 3 years now. And really like and really believe in.
Well, and again, sort of, we're not saying don't do it, pick what you like, go with it, but again, not too many things. Again, just because there's only so much time and money. And again, we have that additive effect that I'm just always like a little curious about, that if I don't know if we keep adding things to it, I just don't know. Yeah.
Well, and I think actually the one thing we haven't talked about yet is the short-term adding of something for marginal gains. So in this case, going back to that again, that Leadville episode we did a few weeks ago, we have been sleeping in an altitude tent for, you know, the past 7 months at this point, because I'm racing Leadville this summer. You were doing you are still doing a heat adaptation protocol because the race season is sort of teeing up.
Well, now I'm in maintenance.
Yeah.
Maintenance.
It's hot out now. So you kind of needed to do that in April, May, because in Ontario, it doesn't really get super hot out. And then boom, it's summer, it's super hot out.
For sure. And I mean, on the flip side, like this is where it gets tricky because, I don't even know what Stephen Chung would say with this, right? Where it's like, you're mixing altitude in with there. There is a bit of research on sort of like using both of those things, and perhaps you could do like a hot altitude.
I was sort of trying to use them as two separate examples, which sort of imply...
Well, but like to your point, like the problem with all of that too, and Stephen and I speak about that in that heat adaptation podcast, is when you're doing that, you actually, like, it is another stressor, same as the altitude tent. So you do need to be careful because the training load, there is fatigue that comes off of that and recovery needs that come off of that. So then I'm also training less.
Right.
It worked out when I did the main loading phase. It was just April here, and it was just such a crummy month. We couldn't get outside to train very much. My motivation for the trainer was also, it fit really great, and I really did like it, and I am seeing great benefit out of it now, I think, at least. And again, this could be completely placebo, but I think heat-wise, I think it's been very effective. But you have to be careful. And similar with the altitude tent, we now are at like sort of a maintenance thing where it's not stressful sleeping in the tent at the altitude we're at. We're sort of just comfortable at it. But it is that timing of all these things and the periodizing of all these nutritional elements and training interventions and what blocks. And that's in Steven Seiler's pyramid, right? That was that fourth one. We didn't really talk about it a lot, but the planning or periodization of training is that fourth rung in the ladder where we start having to like, okay, when does this stuff fit? You didn't have anything else on that?
Nope. I just wanted to kind of make the point that some marginal gains are not really meant to be long-term, like every day forever.
That's periodization, exactly. And it is a misunderstanding. You'll see athletes with volume. I did 20 hours this week once on my training camp, but now to maintain 20 hours, because once you've done it, you need to hold it there forever. Mm-hmm. That's not really how physiology works, and not how periodization or planning of you just don't have 20 hours a lot of times, but there's a stress sometimes that comes with that. Or again, with the creatine or different products, baking soda, like there is a loading phase, and then like ahead of the race where you might use this, or in the block ahead of the month or ahead of the... Okay, thank you. So the idea then is that some of these things, the recovery, that when we're talking about periodization, this is sometimes you don't want to recover as well. Even as a master's athlete, I know our recovery is slower, but sometimes when you train, you want the training stimulus to be a stimulus. You don't want to, mop it all up. So
this is what I was talking about before with the like cold plunge or the huge antioxidant dose.
Yes.
Like, yes, those decrease inflammation, but we don't always want to decrease inflammation.
And so even with something like athletic greens or something like that, I would be careful with when that is around the training. We usually do it in the morning, and then, training's a few hours later, and then, the recovery window's like, a ways after that. And it's not super mega dose. What, 10 years ago, people were maybe trying to do, vitamin C and super mega doses around training to try and mop up antioxidants. And so now we found out that that's actually blunting the training effect. And they've actually shown similar with cold plunges where, yes, it could make you feel less pain or, like you've improved the recovery time, but you don't always want to do that.
Yeah.
Where you might want to bring these things in then, and this is the periodization and the planning, is when we get into that peak week around the race, that might be a great time to sit in your moon boots, to have, maybe a little nutritional support there, something like whey protein that's well supported, which probably you could use a lot anytime. But again, making sure that we are getting recovered and we're not so concerned about getting fitter in the week of. And if we go and train, we do our midweek pre-race intervals, and then we are trying to recover really quick. So we do an ice bath, and we do recovery boots and a nap, and eat lots of food and maybe even a little extra food. These are things that then may not, on the race day, make a lot of sense, but you wouldn't necessarily need or want to do, the ice bath, the moon boots, the extra nutritional support like this, that you wouldn't necessarily do that every week of the year. That could be like very focused on those 1 or 2 weeks. Which
is what makes marginal gains, I think, even harder for masters athletes, because I speak for myself, I guess. I like a routine. I like a habit. I like a thing that's every day I get to tick that box.
And streaks are popular. Yeah. What are the people on Strava going to say when you only ride for an hour a day? Like last week you rode for 20 hours in the whole week, and now it's 6.
No kudos for you.
Yeah, it's unremarkable. And I think that's a lot of this training, right? We joked about the Matt Fitzgerald chocolate milk. The Steven Seiler pyramid there, like it's not sexy. It's just you train 6 days a week and, for the thing, whatever the thing you're doing, you do it a lot of days of the week, right? And that's, I think, the main concept there. Did we want to go through to wrap this up? How are we doing on time?
I think we're all right. I see you have a note on the sexy stuff, so let's hear it. What's the sexy stuff?
YLM Sports Science it was more popular like when Twitter was bigger, and apologies to anyone who still thinks Twitter's big, or knows what Twitter is. I guess it's X. So anyhow, I think they're on Instagram too, but this is maybe a little old now, but
so YLM does really great infographics
of studies. Yeah. So I think they're still doing it. I sort of clicked around the website, and it's still a great website. And so this one here, we'll link to the website, and we'll link to this infographic. And it's a sports supplement framework. And so it sort of lays out ABC, which is, supported ones that might get more studies and maybe have some effect, and then have little or meaningful benefit is sort of the other one, right? Things that don't necessarily or aren't shown to work. And then there's also a banned one. I missed it. There's also a category D. That is banned in a lot of sports. So we'll go just...
Which, by the way, that one is so worth looking at if you are a master's athlete. Like, definitely click through and look at, especially the D banned or high risk of contamination, because I do think, especially master's athletes, I think it's very easy to even get prescribed stuff by a doctor, a naturopath, any of these people that could put you in the banned category. And if you are racing at a national or world level, number one, you're at risk of testing positive. And frankly, it's way more, I'm going to say, it's way more embarrassing to me when a master's athlete tests positive.
No one wants to be outside of the rules. I think we assume this. But that is the tricky thing with this is some of the banned stuff works, I guess, right? Now, that's not to say it doesn't have downsides or risks, right? There's certainly drugs you can take that then, you could risk any sort of things, cardiovascular events, different hormonal effects, right? It might be effective at making you go up a hill faster for one race, but, the long-term health consequences we also want to factor in.
Well, I was joking with a friend, actually, and this also applies to making sure, again, your stuff is certified for sport, third-party tested. A friend of mine is really getting into strength training, and he was asking me about creatine. And I was like, yeah, definitely, sure, give it a shot, whatever. But please, don't get, the cheapest one you can find on Amazon or the one that's, ripped giant pecs creatine now.
Right.
Because there's potentially some other crap in there that you really don't want, and I was trying to explain to him that his balls were going to shrink, and that I think sold him on.
And that world is, they would want to include some of this other stuff so that the product, works really well for you, and you think you're taking creatine, but maybe it's something else, I guess, is the idea. I never understand how the cost works on that, and how it's because creatine's pretty cheap, as far as supplements go, but I don't know. There's other things that are labeled as, super mass builder, whatever, right? And I don't know. I don't know how that stuff works.
Plus with the third-party testing, there's also all these heavy metals and crap that get into some of these protein powders and stuff that aren't third-party tested or aren't NSF certified. So
you are talking about this banned thing, and so this is a very nebulous area, but there is lots of things on there around sort of that hormone replacement therapy, testosterone, different things in there, and that a lot of the banned stuff is around hormones and different things, recovery, growth hormone, these sort of things. And these are things that masters, certainly as we come into menopause, certainly we come into getting older, these are things that legitimately you could get prescribed by a doctor that maybe are banned in sport. And so there is a weird gray area there, and I don't know if that would be in with marginal gains if you're getting testosterone therapy from your doctor.
I don't think it's, you'd have to check me on this, but I don't think it's legal to do that and still compete.
I don't know. That's a good question.
I'm pretty sure that a doctor's note does not let you get away with exogenous testosterone. Again, could be wrong.
I think we're going to leave that one because it is such a gray area. It is probably fine for health at some point.
For sure.
For some people.
Just do your research and know what you're getting into.
But I would say those are probably not, when we're thinking about marginal, right? That's a big choice to make. And then it's also, the difference, if you had a very big problem with that stuff, can be huge, right? Certainly any of my clients who've gone through menopause and started doing HRT, it can be a drastic improvement. So that's something where it can be fairly beneficial, I guess, but then also it's like we're getting into more of like a health discussion there, I think, as well, right?
And definitely, obviously talk to your doctor. Do not just kind of like go willy-nilly into any of this and like take random stuff. Okay. But let's get back to column A, the stuff that pretty much has been shown to be efficacious. We know it works.
I think we spoke earlier about this idea of sugar powder. So this is like a sports drink, gels, bars. So like fueling your workouts. Very good.
Turns out it's
very
helpful.
Good evidence, right? And even though there's something, if you go onto the wrong Instagram channel, you might see fasting, you might see low carb keto, you might see ketones, you might see all this stuff. It is like again, pretty well supported that this stuff works and helps. And I do see that the tide is turning now that we're seeing this huge grams of carbohydrate per hour in fueling. That we do seem to be in a very high carbohydrate swing of the nutritional world. But again, you could find yourself in a dark part of the internet and get confused in that way where it's, you forget about that stuff that's very proven, and then try and chase performance with something that's not really, and certainly most of the research on something like a low carb keto diet is maybe towards health or diabetes or different things that, where it does have benefit, but then you have to again look at like, who are you and what are you limited by when you're making these decisions? So I love that that's the first one, is basically like fuel your workouts. The next one, whey protein. Which is great. Again, that's, really high, is it leucine content? So that it has, I think, the highest, if I'm not mistaken, content. So that again, when we're looking at recovery, pretty well supported that if you get a lot of leucine, I think it's 5 grams or something like that is what they say of leucine.
Yeah. And I think a good serving of protein has 2.3 grams of it per serving.
If you're using whole foods or something, you mean?
No, like if you get a good whey protein supplement, it should have over 2.3 grams of leucine in it.
Oh, okay.
That was just something I learned from when I was working on Fuel Your Ride with Nancy Guest.
Oh, okay. And
PhD
I think a lot
RD.
of them now are going up as high as, I think I can picture like 5 grams on the...
You're probably right. Like it is just a good sign of like good quality
and then
protein,
the
basically.
dose of protein, probably like 30 to 50 grams is sort of the range post-workout when we're talking about protein. Now, of course, you might have that whey protein with some other food, right? Like peanut butter or something, right? So it doesn't, all that protein grams don't have to come from whey protein. But I love that, again, we're thinking about post-workout, don't fast. Get some protein, as well as, refeed as far as carbohydrate and whatever as well. Next one on this list, again, just on this infographic is, what is that? Iron?
Iron and calcium supplements.
And again, probably targeted at certain people, but we do know that a lot of endurance training, especially female, and then especially, so would that be premenopausal?
Yeah.
And then especially runners, there's a lot of damage to red blood cells just because of running. But I think that the stat on, endurance athletes, period, who are anemic or low on iron,
ridiculously high. Yeah,
very high. So again, you would do a blood test with a doctor and try and figure that out, and whether calcium makes sense for you as well. But that makes a lot of sense. Again, iron, pretty important to carrying oxygen, which was one of our main Maslow things, was that air. And when you think about the requirement of air from an endurance standpoint, very important. We mentioned altitude training. So if you're going to altitude, a lot of times that's recommended almost like, I always think it's almost like reckless, but they almost just recommend if you're going to altitude, like start with iron. Again, I would probably do a blood test just to make sure, especially if you're not a premenopausal woman. I would probably really do that. But I think the stat they say as far as premenopausal women, like it's very, 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 like almost like very high.
Yeah. Yeah.
Cool. Next one is a multivitamin mineral supplement. So we did mention athletic greens, but it certainly could be anything. So that's interesting. That's on there. It's not always on there. The multivitamins will swing back and forth as far as whether they're good for health or beneficial or whatever, but it's on this list. Vitamin D, you see a lot of times doctors, I know my doctor is very pro vitamin D, and certainly that could be just getting sun, which again probably relates to those basic physiological needs as well. Interesting, probiotics are on there, and I think this is around gut immune health. Again, that's something I would probably work with someone on, but again, has shown benefit, I think is what they're saying, like for someone with like a gastrointestinal issue. That there's that. And I think I have seen as well with athletes that like when they're traveling or competing, that they've shown that there's like less days sick or something like that. I think I've seen that as well. And again, that would be something we're not saying just blanket go and get it, but so look into.
No, and again, that's a pretty big do your research, because now that probiotics are super popular, there's so many of them, and
certainly it's in athletic greens too, right?
Yeah.
But yeah.
Well, And or just straight up regular food, right? This is your fermented foods, your sauerkrauts, your kimchis, like all that kind of stuff. So you can definitely also just opt for the more natural form of that.
Sure.
For sure. Then we've got caffeine. Hooray! So our coffee.
Yeah, we're getting into the poopy ones now, but that's so caffeine's pretty obvious. Again, tons of research on caffeine over the years. You know, certainly there can be downside if you take too much or you're someone who's sensitive. So again, it's not, none of these things are good for everyone and good for everything. If you were someone who was like a target shooter, you may not actually want caffeine. I don't know about that, but I'm pretty sure. I don't even know if you can. There's some sports it's still banned, I think, too. But again, you need to relax. So sometimes, you know, the amount of arousal or you know, how excited you need to be, how amped up you need to be, you know, vary. So there you go. And then there's beta alanine, which we'll just sort of go through quick. It's sort of like akin to a creatine or something like that in sort of short-term sports. Bicarbonate. This is our baking soda, which we already spoke about. Beetroot juice we talked about. That's probably a good one for masters. We won't go into that a ton. We do have a older podcast, and I'm trying to remember with who it was. But I think that's what they were saying too, wasn't it? Was that less maybe benefit for the elites, which is often the case because they've already maxed out so many of their benefits.
Right.
But that beetroot juice might be a place to look as far as sort of that like blood flow for masters. Again, with caution.
And to be clear, you can also eat beets and beet
arugula
greens.
Or rocket is a very high in nitrate, I believe it is. So again, we can start whole foods. They're just, you know, I chop up beets and put them in eggs most days of the week, which is sort of disgusting, Molly says. But there you go. I'm getting my my natural nitrate.
And we do saute the beet greens, like when we actually do get just a bunch of beets, and
arugula is great.
Fine.
We grow that, so that's there.
Fantastic.
But then that's something again you might top. There is some great studies on the whole food. I think there is actually a infographic on the site too, where they talk about, you know, you can really over time chronically raise your levels of it just by, you know, through these whole foods.
Sure.
If you have things like this arugula and so forth. And then last but not least, creatine, which is I think the most studied supplement and you know, shown to be pretty safe and efficacious. And then also now they're talking about the benefits around concussions and all this sort of stuff. So that's on the list, and that's the end of that stuff that probably works. And again, not to take all of them, but to find the one that makes sense for you.
Definitely go with the add one at a time. Do not just go out and purchase that entire list.
Well, I mean, maybe not the entire list too, but yeah, the you know, fuel your workouts, and then maybe there's like a supplement in there if you want.
Yeah. Cool. Well, I think that wraps up our marginal gains. If anyone has actually like you know, marginal gain they want us to either confirm, debunk, or just discuss further, if there's like one
have
thing.
someone on, right? Like if it's like, you know, what's the latest on beetroot juice? We can do we haven't heard a lot about that recently, so
yeah. So let us know what's interesting in this. You know, we know the topic of marginal gains is just, you know, it's just always going to be of interest to people because I mean, hey, like we're all looking for that. So definitely hit us up if you have a question about a specific one, if you have comments, people you want to have on to talk about it. You can find us over at consummateathlete.com. Side note, new website.
Oh yeah.
We have a new look to our website. We would actually love if anyone's listening, if you would go to consummateathlete.com and maybe just, you know, poke around, see what you think. Let us know. You can, you know, we have a great new contact form, so there's that. Or you can also find us on Instagram at Consummate Athlete. Shoot us a DM, leave us a comment on this episode, whatever works.
Cool. And yeah, the store's built out, so there's shirts there, and then you can get training plans in the store now as well. So there you go.
Yes, and we do have a weekly newsletter. Just so many things. Anyway, you can find all that at consummateathlete.com. And for now, have a great week of training. Good luck finding the marginal gain that works for you, and we will see you next week. Thanks so much for tuning in to the Consummate Athlete podcast. If you want to hear more training, racing, and endurance sport advice, make sure you subscribe to the podcast and leave us a rating and review. You can also subscribe to our newsletter at consummateathlete.com for a weekly dose of inspiration and advice straight to your inbox.